Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our regular Wednesday Live. And I'm going to be talking to you about managing mental health in the workplace today and some of the challenges that we have with regards to um, that sort of mental health literacy or that middle management layer. And it's one of the things that usually happens when we have a look at how we approach mental health in organizations, that the mental health literacy elements is one of the things that's got a much bigger focus in the last couple of years. And the reason that I wanted to just sort of talk to you about it today was because um, there's a lot of areas that are doing education around mental health literacy to improve mental health literacy. And I want you to think about mental health first aid is designed to actually do that. But one of the latest research papers that's come out talked about mental health literacy and having a look at whether or not that's enough in terms of how it predicts a leader's approach to a person who might have a mental health condition. Now, I want you to try and see if you can just think the separation between somebody who might have gone off with a mental health situation because of, perceived bullying or harassment in the workplace, and if that involved the supervisor, then the communication from that supervisor to their subordinate who's gone off on leave isn't necessarily going to be appropriate, right? So this isn't necessarily looking at that. It's looking at, the mental health of people just in general, and that sometimes we can end up with mental health conditions that develop for a whole range of reasons within our staff members. And that regardless of what caused them, and I want you to think about, sometimes it can be ill health. Somebody might develop cancer or some other health condition, or one of their family members might. They might be going through a relationship breakdown. They might have had some other situation outside of the work environment that has actually resulted in them developing a level of a mental health condition, be that, depression or anxiety or some other issue. If they're in a particular area that it's prone to developing PTSD, for example, then their mental health situation might escalate at any point in time in their work kind of situation, but not necessarily because of the work situation. So, and I think the distinction is actually one that's very important for us to make, because that distinction really does make a big impact on whether or not that person is going to be contacted by their supervisor or that person sort of directly. Now, I have been putting together a new assessment, actually looking at what sort of mind manager are you. And this is to try and help people in that sort of middle management space to understand what sort of compassionate leader they might be, or how they approach a person who might have mental health challenges in the workplace. And it'll give you a score in order to help you kind of identify the areas that you might be able to do some more, skill building in. And one of the challenges around building up our skills in this area, our people skills, there are certain things that we can learn, but there are innate sort of skills that come. Certain people have better, approaches to. Um, I want you to think about their natural abilities. So it's not just something that we can learn about and apply. It's about trying to give people more exposure and understanding to, what people can feel and what that can do in terms of how it impacts their work and their work environment. So when we start talking about some of the industries that traditionally don't have those kind of softer people oriented sort of skills, then we start looking at, much, I want to say, harsher approaches to, the things that people, um, the way people approach, applications for, time off or flexible hours or any of those sorts of things that people need some adapting to if they've got a known mental health condition. And I'm just reflecting back on one organization that I worked with where one of their younger staff members had a recent diagnosis of bipolar, and trying to help the organization understand what that meant. because for the person who was experiencing bipolar, it meant that they were able to be more productive at certain points in time, and then they had other periods of time where they were less productive. But their ability to contribute when they were feeling more productive and well, they were much more productive at that point in time than they were likely to be if things were a bit flat and not going so well. So what I did was work with that organization to help them make some, adjustments around the flexibility of this person's attendance or the way that they worked, to support them, that when times weren't going so well, that, there was some flexibility in that access to, downtime, and that the job that they were doing couldn't be one that was a time critical role. So they had to look at changing the role for that person, but in doing so, what they actually then found was that they had a person who was actually making a greater contribution because they were able to make a flexible contribution, right? And this is something that we have to look at a lot with mental health, because if you can provide flexibility, and if they're not doing a role that requires them to have things done in a certain period of time, they're more likely to then make a really strong positive contribution at the time that they're able, because they feel supported to, take the time out when they're not able. And it really does set up this sort of sense of, loyalty and gratitude. That means that when they're actually able to be at work and making that positive contribution, they really are making a bigger contribution than what they would have done if they were constantly feeling like they were being criticized for taking time off. And what we see is that when there's inflexibility around the working arrangements of people with mental health condition, what tends to happen is they end up taking more time off, because it's like an all or nothing situation. Oh, well, I don't feel so great this morning and I'm going to be slow off the mark, so I'm not going to make it in by 10 o'clock. No, I'm not allowed to just turn up at lunchtime and make the contribution that I can for that day, so I don't go at all, right? And so what we try and do is put into place some plan that the staff member actually kind of recognizes for themselves, and it might need more regular review. So depending on the mental health condition, sometimes people have, quite, in a case of bipolar, you can have somebody who's, up one week and down the next, or up one day and down the next day, or up for months and then has a bad kind of month. And so it's not able to be easily predicted. But somebody who's experiencing some level of depression or anxiety, what you might find is that the anxiety, for example, might prevent them kind of, they'll have a harder time getting out the door and getting into work at a certain period of time. And so if that kind of, there's no flexibility around their start time, or, the role that they're doing, that they could start from home or whatever it is, then they're just going to ring in and say that they're sick and take the whole day off. So a big part of how you manage somebody with a mental health condition has an awful lot to do with how much flexibility you can give them, and then helping them to put in place a plan and asking them what would work for them. And this is obviously something that's a real challenge for people to do, but I want to say much easier for managers to understand that need to put the flexibility in place because of what we've learned through COVID. And I think it's an important recognition about the flexibility, and actually when you give people a sense of, trust and appreciation for the contribution that they can make, that when they are able to, they make a better contribution or a greater contribution, because they'll come in and they'll focus on what it is that they need to do, because you're supporting them to manage the rest of their life outside of their work. Now, a lot of that doesn't necessarily fall neatly in line with what the manager needs to get, done today. And that's what I mean about there will be time critical issues, there'll be challenges, and not every working role is going to be able to have that level of flexibility. But if you can make some adjustments, or you can kind of see that person as an additional resource to pick up the slack, whatever it is, depending on your work environment, it's going to change. Where if you can make that flexibility sit there, you will find that those people will turn up to work more than what they would have if there is no flexibility. Because without the flexibility, they just end up calling in sick, right? Because I can't I can't push myself to get over this hurdle and feel a bit better to get myself out the door because I'm going to be late. And in being late, I'm in trouble. So I'll just call in sick today. So it's a really fine line and a tricky one that requires a bit of time and effort from the person who's managing to make those adjustments. The other thing is around the communication. So when I started all of this, I was talking about mental health literacy. There is an awareness that says, we think if we've got more, mental health literacy, then the approach to the person is better. But no, actually, it's about the confidence that you have about understanding the mental health condition. And then, do you have access to the right kind of resources to ask the questions about what are reasonable adjustments to make for somebody with this particular mental health condition? Now, the best source of information for that is to ask the employee themselves. And this is one of the things that we tend not to do as managers, because we kind of go, well, I'm the leader around here, and so I'm telling you what I need, and I'm telling you what I think you should do. Now, that doesn't get us very far, especially with somebody with a mental health condition. If you can approach them from a perspective and say, okay, so what can we do to support you to make the best contribution that you can in the time that you're here, right? And how can we adjust your work hours or make the flexibility in the work role, whatever it is, to mean that you can make the best contribution that you can make at any given point in time, regardless of, how you're feeling or what else might be going on for you. What you'll find is that this person, one, really appreciates the fact that you're prepared to hear them and understand, and will give you their insight, hopefully, about their own situation. Now, most people don't take the time to ask the person what it means for them in terms of, what they're emotionally sort of feeling and some of the barriers for them to be able to come in and make an active contribution to the workplace. Because depending on what your relationship is like with that employee, they're not sure that if they tell you all of the things that won't be used against them, right? So there's a huge amount of rapport building that needs to go in to build a level of confidence that the staff member who's dealing with the issue is feeling confident enough to tell you honestly what it is that they need or what sort of support they need. And they're going to do that if they feel like they've got somebody who understands mental health. So there's got to be a level of confidence within the manager about understanding what the mental health condition might be and how that might impact their work. But also, there's got to be a level of support for helping them to, move forward and make a positive contribution, regardless of the fact that they're not having a great day. So it's kind of like not pushing them because, you just have to do it and get on with it, but more a recognition of, okay, well, today's not a great day. Try and focus on this and this because they're the key priorities, and let's see how far we get. And if you get stuck or you've got a bit of brain fog or you can't remember something, let's just give you some, make these notes a step by step and follow the bouncing ball idea. A lot of people will say to me, it's too hard to manage those people. And in reality, you have to recognize that almost every human being at some point in their life is going to have a mental health condition, whether they have it diagnosed or identified or not. Because we have difficulties that come to us through life, relationship difficulties, family challenges, health issues, all of these things that kind of normally knock the wind out of our sails for a bit and make it a bit harder for us to kind of get on with life. And so it's important to, I want to say, recognize that those things kind of happen, recognize that these are things that we need to learn as leaders to be more accommodating of people's individual needs. And it's not meant to be this big comparison. Often what I find is people will say, oh, but, we can't make those adjustments for that person because, all these people over here, they don't get that level of flexibility. Well, they would if they needed it, right? I mean, isn't that the whole point? I remember managing teams years ago, and I had a team of young people and I had a team of working mothers. And the working mothers usually would come in, and in a 5-hour period, they'd get as much done as the team of young people in 7.5 hours, right? Because they didn't come in and do all of the other stuff. Their focus was on wanting to make sure that they had a role that they could do around kids going to school. So when they came into work, they focused, they got in, they did what they needed to do, and they went home again. they didn't kind of do all of the other stuff that, a lot of the other people would do, in emails and checking this and doing that and chatting to this one and having coffee. And do you know what I mean? Like normal kind of things in work environments. And then they would complain, oh, but the working mums, they all get access to school holidays and all of these sorts of things. And in the end, I pulled them in and kind of went, well, what's the issue here? Oh, well, what if we want time off in the school holidays? They get the priority. And it's kind of like, well, that's just because of where they're at in their life stage. And at some point in the future, because we're a community of people, you're going to have that need in your life stage, maybe, if that's what you want for a family. But, is there any real reason? We're not saying you can't have it, but it would just, preference is given this way for these reasons. And, it's just something that we would like to consider. But, sure, if you haven't been able to go and have Christmas with your family for, a couple of years because everybody who's got children gets priority, well, then let's have a look at making, you get a priority instead. It's not that hard to actually be quite flexible. But the thing is, we often like to stick with our rigid rules because that just makes it easier for us to make decisions rather than it being adapted to what it is that individuals kind of need. The larger the organization, the more inclined we are to kind of stick with these rigid siloed rules so that everybody's treated fairly. And it's true, we do need to treat people fairly, but we also, in treating them fairly, should be able to make like adjustments in the work environment to support them. The problem that I find is that most leaders assume that a person's kind of trying to manipulate the system to get more time off and more time out of here, and that they're not really committed to actually delivering the best role that they can when they're there. But honestly, most human beings really like to feel like they're valued for what they do and they're appreciated for the commitment that they can make. And when they're not in a great space, they really appreciate the fact that somebody's there to accept and support that they're not having a good time and work out a way to help them through it. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents worth. I hope that that helps, and that you can find some flexibility for those people, and have a look at some training around building that level of confidence and a bit more kind of interaction, communication skills around discussing mental health issues more broadly, and you probably find that that will really help your middle management team. All right. I hope that helps, and I will see you next week.